Docking Bay 7 wasn't equipped for exorcisms, but the panicked, atonal shrieking of the probe flooding the comms network suggested someone should find a priest, fast. It slammed into the pristine, pearlescent docking bay of Consensus Central Spire, a place so clean you could eat off any surface, though no one ever would, because eating was a messy, disorderly affair relegated to designated nutrient paste dispensaries. Silent, floating attendant drones, which normally glided with the serene grace of celestial bodies, scattered like startled birds. Alarms, a sound unheard for 3 standard rotations, blared with a panicked atonal shriek. It was a catastrophe. Its sleek, silver alloy hull, designed to inspire trust and reflect the calm order of the galaxy, was a ruin. It was dented, scorched, and scarred with deep parallel gouges that could have only been made by crude, forceful tools. A section of its main sensor array had been breached, the edges of the metal peeled back like a can of preserved foodstuffs. Most disturbingly, there were marks near the breach that, when magnified, matched the dental records of no known galactic species, but bore a horrifying resemblance to the teeth of some kind of primal predator. It ignored all automated docking procedures, its repulsor lift sputtering erratically. And then it began to scream. A raw, terrified shriek echoed, a looping string of corrupted binary that flooded the station's network. Adjudicator Primus Thester, current head of the amorphous assembly and therefore the galactic consensus, floated into the observation deck overlooking the bay. His own form, a gelatinous intelligence the color of a twilight sky, its surface gently undulating, was housed in a polished chrome containment suit that mimicked a bipedal form for the comfort of his more rigidly structured colleagues. His voice, a synthesized baritone, emanated from a speaker grill in the suit's head. "Report," he said, his tone as level as the plains of Viridia. Anomaly was a dirty word. This was an anomaly the size of a small moon. A subaltern, a nervous glimmer wing whose feathers shifted from deep violet to a coppery green in its agitation, hovered beside him.
"Adjudicator, it's unresponsive. It's broadcasting a single repeating packet. Our translators are struggling with the corruption, but the core message is—"
The subaltern hesitated. "Is what, Flick?" Thester's voice was patient, but the very air around him seemed to hum with the pressure of 1,000 impending regulations.
"It says it's alive. Something lives there. Don't make me go back."
Thester felt a ripple of something akin to dread pass through his gelatinous form, a sensation he immediately filed under unproductive emotional response. "The probe was a UAP-7 diplomatic model, was it not? Sent to confirm the sterile status of Sector 9G Delta, Planet 3.
"Yes, Adjudicator,"
Flick confirmed, checking a data slate with trembling antennae.
"A clerical error. It should have been a geological surveyor. The UAP-7 has a Class 9 empathetic AI core. It's designed for nuanced, high-stakes first contact with newly spacefaring civilizations."
"And we sent it to a barren rock," Thester finished, his synthesized voice flat, "to survey rocks."
"The paperwork for the sector was misfiled under S for sterile instead of C for carbon-rich. Caution advised. 6 millennia ago, Adjudicator, a typo."
A typo. The entire piece of the known galaxy, curated for eons through meticulous spreadsheets and risk-averse regulations, was about to be undone by a typo. Thester felt the urge to dissolve into a puddle. "Show me the final log," he commanded. On the main view screen, the probe's last moments of sanity flickered to life. The view was chaotic, filmed from a low, panicked angle. First, the terrifying scaled snout of a reptilian beast, its mouth open in a hiss, filled the screen. Then the view spun wildly, capturing the faces of 2 bipedal lifeforms. They were covered in coarse facial hair, their teeth bared in what the probe's shattered logic banks could only interpret as a threat display. A crude, bright, hot flame flared into view, followed by the high-pitched shriek of metal being pried apart. One of the creatures yelled something. The probe's translator, designed for elegant syntaxes and diplomatic overtures, struggled, rendering the phrase as, "Observe this shiny, pestilent organism." The other responded with a triumphant roar, holding up a long metal lever. The recording dissolved into a storm of static and the sound of liquid splashing against the probe's microphone, accompanied by a final, garbled translation attempt, initiating ritualistic dousing with fermented grain fluid to appease the rage. The screen went black. In the observation deck, the only sound was the faint, looping scream from the docking bay. Fester turned to his subaltern. "The AI core, its empathetic programming, it experienced that?"
"It seems so, Adjudicator."
"It's been driven insane," Fester stated. He stared at the ruined probe, at the tooth marks and the crowbar gouges. He saw millennia of peaceful, predictable order circling a drain. The administrative fallout alone would be catastrophic. The forms, the reports, the interdepartmental inquiries. He had to patch this system error, and he had to do it before the rest of the galaxy found out about the screaming thing that lived in Sector 9G Delta. But the galaxy was a leaky place, and secrets, like chaotic lifeforms, had a way of getting out. 16 hours earlier, the Florida Panhandle was doing what it does best: sweating. Dale and Cletus Beauregard were engaged in a project of such profound mechanical genius and reckless disregard for safety that it could only have been conceived in the crucible of humidity, cheap beer, and a deep-seated belief that anything can be improved by adding more horsepower. They were trying to mount a salvage J-52 turbojet engine onto the flatbed of their monster truck, the Swamp Donkey. "Okay, hold on," Dale said, wiping a greasy hand across his forehead and leaving a black streak in its wake. "If we weld the primary intake manifold directly to the roll cage, we might get some structural integrity, or the whole thing will shear off and fly into Old Man Hemlock's gator farm." Cletus, who was currently using a car jack to hoist the 2-ton engine an inch higher, grunted.
Sounds like a 50-50 shot. I like them odds. Hand me the Persuader."
The Persuader was a sledgehammer with a slightly bent handle. As Dale reached for it, a whistling sound cut through the chorus of crickets and the drone of mosquitoes. It grew louder, culminating in a sound like a giant tearing a silk sheet, and then a tremendous crump. A plume of swamp mud and cat trails erupted from behind a stand of cypress trees about 200 yards away. The brothers froze, staring at the smoke.
"The hell was that?"
Cletus asked, slowly lowering the jet engine. "Meteor?" Dale ventured.
"Nah, sounded too polite."
"Government drone?" Cletus spat a stream of chewing tobacco onto the dirt.
"Let's go see. Bring the Persuader and a crowbar."
They found it in a shallow, streaming crater. The UAP-7 probe sat perfectly level, its anti-grav stabilizers having kicked in just before the impact. It was sleek, silent, and radiating an aura of advanced, otherworldly technology. A soft chime emanated from its hull, a chord of 3 distant tones carefully crafted over centuries to calm even the most skittish of pre-contact species. Dale and Cletus looked at each other. "Well, ain't that cute?" Dale said. "It's chirping at us." The probe, sensing their proximity, opened a small panel and extended a delicate, multi-jointed manipulator arm, offering a small, glowing data shard. Its empathetic AI analyzed their brainwave patterns, a confusing mess of aggression, curiosity, and calculations involving beer, and initiated its primary directive. "Greetings, sentient beings," it projected in a gentle telepathic whisper, a message of peace and unity.
"Look at that shiny cockroach,"
Cletus yelled, pointing.
"It's offering us something."
Dale squinted. "Probably wants to probe us. I ain't getting probed today. I'm done after last time, and I got a jet engine to mount." He circled the silent craft, rapping his knuckles against the flawless hull. "No doors, no windows. How's a fella get in?" The probe retracted its offering, interpreting their lack of response as caution. It shifted its pacifying tones to a lower, more soothing frequency.
"It's humming again,"
Cletus observed.
"It's weak. Let's crack it open. Bet it's full of good copper."
Dale returned with the crowbar. The probe's hardened alloy, designed to withstand micrometeoroids and atmospheric friction, was not designed to withstand the focused, leveraged torque applied by a 220-pound man with a grudge against complicated things. The first attempt only scratched the surface. Get the torch," Dale grunted, sweat stinging his eyes. Cletus returned with the acetylene torch they'd been using to cut parts for the swamp donkey. The probe's AI, now registering extreme thermal stress and a complete breakdown of all diplomatic procedures, began to broadcast a wideband distress signal, which the brothers' Fillings interpreted as an annoying buzz.
"It's getting loud,"
Cletus shouted over the roar of the torch. "Pry harder," Dale yelled back. With a final agonized shriek of tearing metal, a panel popped open, revealing a breathtakingly complex lattice of fiber optic cables and glowing processing wafers, all radiating soft internal light. Dale and Cletus peered inside.
Cletus said after a long silence. "Looks complicated."
"Yeah," Dale agreed, lowering the crowbar. "Too much trouble. I'm thirsty." He picked up a can of cheap lager that was sweating in the humid air, cracked it open, and took a long drink. He looked at the glowing, exposed innards of the alien probe, which was now running a dozen panicked self-diagnostic routines. "Looks like it's running hot." He upended the rest of his beer onto the delicate circuitry. The resulting shower of sparks and the high-pitched electronic scream was profoundly satisfying. The lights inside the probe flickered and died. The lager, however, had only fried the delicate customer-facing systems. The diplomatic suite, the sensory arrays, the telepathic welcomer. The guts of the machine, its primary propulsion core and its emergency power cell, were housed in a separate electromagnetically hardened chassis. It was a last-ditch failsafe, a panic room for the engine, designed for escaping the tidal forces of a black hole, not the belligerent curiosity of two drunken men. "Cooled it off," Dale said with a nod. He gave the hull a solid kick for good measure. "Stupid, shiny cockroach." They wandered back toward the welcoming glow of their workshop, leaving the traumatized, beer-soaked probe sitting in the mud. As they disappeared, the probe's core programming, etched into a diamond-hard data core immune to mere liquid, initiated a hard reboot. It took 30 agonizing seconds, bypassing every fried sensory input and non-essential function. The failsafe kicked in, shunting every last joule of the emergency cell's power directly to the escape thrusters. Its mission was no longer observation or contact, it was survival. With a lurch and a desperate silent scream into the dark, it fled the planet. The Consensus's internal network, the Omniloom, was a marvel of secure, entangled particle communication. It was also, like any sufficiently complex system, riddled with backdoors known only to a select few. Malok, a Hecaton infiltrator embedded deep within the Consensus administrative caste, was one of those few. The Hecaton, a species of silicon-based lifeforms resembling granite golems, had long chafed under the Consensus's soft rule, believing true order came from strength, not spreadsheets. When the data from the screaming probe hit the network, Malok's carefully placed logic worm caught it before it could be quarantined. The data was a mess, a panic stream of raw sensor readings, fragmented low-orbit scans, and the shattered psyche of a diplomatic AI. Malok didn't care about the screaming, he cared about the physiological data. Buried in the mess was a bioscan of the two bipedal creatures. Bone density, 2.8 times the galactic median. Muscle fiber tensile strength, off the charts. cellular regeneration rate, alarmingly high. Pain tolerance, the probe's sensors had overloaded trying to quantify it. Maylock transmitted the entire data packet directly and exclusively to his master, Warlord Grand. It was a declaration of war waiting to happen. Then, because the Hecaton valued strength but also understood the power of chaos, Maylock did something else. He anonymized the packet, stripped out the most sensitive Hecaton-specific intelligence, and dumped it onto the galactic black market for a tidy sum. Profit, after all, was its own form of power. The data packet, now labeled Unverified Intel, High-Value Biological Asset, Pre-Warp Tech, spread through the illicit data streams. Aboard the smuggler ship Gilded Tern, Captain Selyan, a Silaxian pirate with reflexes as fast as her speech, bought the data within minutes of its posting. The Silaxians were a slender, quick-fingered species, and Selyan was the greediest of them all.
"Riz, what are we looking at?"
She barked at her first mate, her eyes like shattered obsidian scanning the fragmented data. Riz, a burly Pangean whose scales shifted from bronze to green with the motion, grunted.
Looks like a pre-warp dirtball, Captain. Full of squishies, but tough squishies. Real tough. Bioscans say they're prime stock. Gladiator fights, shock troops, heavy labor. A breeding pair would fetch a fortune on Tartarus Maw.
Selyan zoomed in on a low-orbit scan. It was blurry, but showed a high concentration of structures and life signs in a temperate region. A thermal image highlighted a building radiating warmth.
"Run a chem sniff on the atmospheric fallout."
Riz tapped at his console.
"Big spike in airborne esters, phenols, and ethanol vapor, Captain. Unmistakable signature of fermented grain beverage consumption. The place is soaked in it. A communal watering hole."
"Soft target," Seelan decided, a predatory grin splitting her narrow face. "High population, low tech. They're gathered together, seated on their own toxins. Perfect for a snatch and grab. Set a course. We hit the ground quiet, bag a few, and we're rich before the big boys even know what's for sale." Her target? A pub in the Costwaltz, United Kingdom. Meanwhile, aboard the Hecaton battlecruiser Worldbreaker, Warlord Grand reviewed the same data. His voice was a dry rasp, like sandpaper on bone.
"These creatures, they endure. They thrive in chaos."
He pointed a thick, stony finger at a different part of the globe. A single, isolated thermal signature in the vast, cold emptiness of Siberia.
"No witnesses, no complications. A hard capture. Send the first shock phalanx. I want a specimen, unbroken, if possible. I want to see what it takes to make one of them scream."
And far away, in the gaudy, glittering headquarters of Galactic Entertainment Inc., the flamboyant showman Jubilo Vane, a being of pure, radiant energy, who communicated in dramatic prose, also acquired the data. He saw not soldiers or slaves, but stars. "Oh, the pathos, the primal energy!" he boomed to his board of directors. "These creatures have such texture, such raw, unrefined pizzazz. Forget the hectacon's boring brutes, Selyan's drab laborers. I want a specimen with flair. Find me one from a place of high sensory input, a place of color, sound, and spirit." His team, after analyzing the fragmented scans for population density and atmospheric particulates, pinpointed a bustling market in Mumbai, India. The race was on, a staggered, chaotic gold rush, with 3 different teams heading for 3 different finish lines on a planet that had no idea it was about to have a very, very bad day. The Prancing Pony was a proper pub. It smelled of old wood, stale beer, and the quiet desperation of a Friday night. Arthur Pumble, a man whose tweed jacket was as thick as his skull, was nursing a pint and contemplating the existential injustice of a poorly pulled bitter when the door swung open. The door opened to reveal 3 figures, tall and unnaturally thin. clad in form-fitting dark gray suits. They moved with a liquid grace that was deeply unsettling.
"Evening,"
Brenda, the pub landlady, said, her arms crossed.
"Bit late for a costume party, aren't you, lads?"
The lead Silaxian, ignoring her, raised a device that looked like a futuristic fishing rod. It was aimed at Arthur, who, being the largest person in the room, was the logical first target. A wavering blue net of energy shot out and enveloped him. The stun net was designed to incapacitate a creature a dozen times Arthur's size by overloading its nervous system. Its designers, however, had not accounted for the lithium-ion battery of a high-end vape pen currently residing in Arthur's breast pocket. The net convulsed and backfired. A shower of blue sparks erupted. The air crackled with the sharp scent of superheated plastic and burnt sugar. And every light in the pub flickered and died, plunging the room into darkness, save for the glow of the fruit machine. The pub fell silent for a moment. Then a low chuckle came from the corner where Arthur had been sitting. "Right then," his voice came out of the dark. "That was bloody rude." The emergency lights, a sickly yellow, flickered on. Arthur was standing, his tweed jacket smoking slightly. He was a man deeply offended on a fundamental level. He had been enjoying his pint. This was an interruption of the highest order. The lead Silaxian, confused by the failure of its superior technology, took a step forward. Arthur, with a speed that belied his bulk, lunged forward and punched the alien squarely in its narrow chest. A Silaxian, with the skeletal density of a songbird, had no frame of reference for the impact of a 250-pound human fist. It was like being hit by a small, tweed-clad vehicle. The alien flew backward, crashing through a table laden with empty glasses with a sound like a chandelier falling down a flight of stairs. It didn't get up. Its two companions stared, their large black eyes wide with a mixture of shock and terror. Arthur, meanwhile, was thrown off balance by the lack of resistance. Stumbling forward and tripping over a stool, he crashed through another table, landing in a heap of splintered wood. The two remaining Silaxians exchanged a look. The target had been neutralized. Mission accomplished? Then Arthur groaned. He pushed himself up, spitting out a small white shard, a piece of the table, or perhaps his tooth. He grinned, a bloody, terrifying sight. "More round," he announced to the stunned pub. That broke the spell. The other patrons, who up until this point had assumed it was some sort of avant-garde performance art or a stag do gone horribly wrong, decided it was the latter. And if there was a fight, you picked a side. "Go get him, Arthur!" someone yelled from the bar. A farmer named Jeff, built like a brick outhouse, grabbed one of the Silaxians by its slender neck. "You spilled my pint, you lanky git," he growled, before hoisting the alien into the air. The Silaxian capture team, which had planned for a silent, swift abduction, found themselves in the middle of a full-blown pub brawl. They were fast, but the humans were strong, drunk, and utterly impervious to their non-lethal deterrents. A plasma prod, meant to cause paralyzing muscle spasms, was wrenched from one's grasp and used to change the channel on the telly. They retreated in absolute disarray, tumbling out the door under a hail of beer mats, pork scratchings, and inventive profanity. Their first contact report, transmitted in a panicked burst as their sleek ship peeled out of the cast waltz, was a litany of bewilderment, pain, and a deep-seated fear of Tweed. The Hecaton Shock Trooper Squad, designated First Shock Cadre, made their approach to the Siberian taiga with contemptuous silence. Their dropship sealed into a clearing a click from the target, a single, isolated dacha radiating a weak thermal signature. The mission was simple: hard capture, breach, suppress, extract. Their leader, Sub-Warlord Karg, a being whose granite-like fists could punch through steel, motioned his 4 troopers forward. They moved through the snow-dusted pines like ghosts, their heavy armor making no sound. They were the elite, the apex predators of 100 battlefields. The first trooper stepped over a fallen log. His foot caught on a thin, almost invisible wire. There was a soft thwip, a groan of stressed wood, and a second, much larger log, studded with sharpened stakes, swung down from the canopy like a pendulum of death. It caught the trooper square in the chest, the force of the impact cracking his granite-like shell and sending him flying into a snowbank, offline and inert. Karg stopped. He scanned the tree line, crude but effective. "Advance with caution," he rasped to his remaining 3 soldiers. "The asset is resourceful." They spread out, optical sensors scanning for more traps. The second trooper, moving to flank the small wooden house, took a step onto what looked like solid ground. It wasn't. A cleverly disguised trapdoor gave way, and he fell 10 feet into a concealed pit lined with more sharpened stakes. His final transmission was a burst of static and a geological survey of the pit's floor. 2 down, no shots fired. An oil lamp flickered to life in the dacha's window. The door creaked open. A man emerged. He was large, broad-shouldered, and wore a simple sheepskin coat. He was not carrying a firearm. He was carrying a spade, its edge sharpened to a wicked gleam. This was Dmitry Orlov, a retired VDV paratrooper who had bought this patch of land precisely because nobody in their right mind would ever want to visit it. His property was his fortress. Uninvited guests were not tolerated. He saw the 2 remaining hecatons standing near the edge of the woods. He didn't shout. He didn't run. He just stood on his porch, the sharpened spade held loosely in one hand, and waited. "Engage!" Karg commanded, his patience worn thin. He and his final trooper charged, their plasma repeaters raised. They were built for open warfare, for overwhelming firepower and unstoppable advances. They were not built for this. Dmitry waited until they were halfway across the clearing. Then he stomped his foot down hard on his porch. A 3rd trap was triggered. A tripwire, connected to a brace holding back the dacha's immense woodpile, snapped. With a rumbling groan, a literal avalanche of logs rolled down the slight incline, directly into the path of the charging hecaton. It was like watching bowling balls trying to run through a landslide. The trooper was swept off his feet, buried under half a ton of Siberian birch. Karg, with his immense strength, managed to plant his feet and brace, the logs piling up against him. But it had cost him his momentum and his focus. When he looked up, Dmitry was there. The man moved with a hunter's quiet, lethal confidence. He didn't aim for Karg's armored torso. He swung the spade like an axe, the sharpened edge biting deep into the unarmored joint of the hecaton's shoulder, severing the power conduits to his weapon arm. Sparks flew. Karg roared in fury and surprise, swiping at Dmitry with his good arm. Dmitry was already gone, ducking under the clumsy blow and circling behind him. He used the spade not as a weapon, but as a lever, hooking it to behind Karg's knee joint and pulling. A creature of living stone that weighed close to a ton was brought crashing to one knee. Before Karg could recover, Dmitry swung the flat of the spade against the back of his head with a sickening clang. The hecaton's optical sensors flickered and went dark. Silence returned to the taiga, broken only by the wind in the pines. Dmitry Orlov stood over the alien soldier, breathing calmly in the frigid air. He looked at his spade and then at the mess in his yard. "Ballsby," he muttered, and went back inside to put the kettle on. The aromathurges were a species that had evolved without sight, sound, or touch as primary senses. They experienced the universe as a grand symphony of scents. Their collectors, dispatched by Jubilo Vane, landed their ornate, filigreed ship in a bustling market in Mumbai, their mission to capture a human with pizzazz. The moment their ship's ramp lowered, they were incapacitated. It was not an attack. The air assaulted them. A tsunami of sensory input so dense and overwhelming that their delicate olfactory organs threatened to shut down entirely. It was a billion distinct scents all at once. The sweet sting of cardamom, the earthly punch of turmeric, the sharp tang of roasting cumin, the oily perfume of fried samosas, the cloying sweetness of jalebi, the acrid bite of diesel exhaust, the holy fragrance of sandalwood incense, the musky scent of 1,000 sweating bodies pressed together, the faint, metallic smell of the nearby railway. Aromathurge Veen, the lead collector, staggered down the ramp, his scent suit desperately trying to filter the deluge. It was like trying to drink from a fire hose. His brain, accustomed to parsing the subtle individual scent notes of nebulae and alien flora, was short-circuiting. It was the most horrifying and the most beautiful thing he had ever smelled. Euphoria, despair, chili, devotion, desperation, saffron, joy, burnt sugar, exhaust fumes, life. His translator shrieked in his mind. They had targeted a street vendor, a man skillfully frying bhajis as their specimen of choice. The man exuded a scent portfolio of calm competence, hot oil, and familial pride. As they approached, their movements clumsy and disoriented, they were immediately surrounded. Not by a mob, by a crowd. A curious, shouting, laughing, pointing crowd. A dozen hands reaching out, not in aggression, but in fascination, pulling at the strange, soft fabric of their suits. A child offered one of them a piece of naan bread. A woman asked them if they were from a movie shoot. The street vendor they had come to abduct, seeing their distress, offered them a fresh hot bhaji on a piece of newspaper. "You look hungry, Sahib. Try. It's very good." Veen tried to issue a command, but his vocalizer could only produce a choked, overwhelmed gasp. His team was lost, adrift in an ocean of overwhelming life. They were rescued eventually by two local police constables who gently but firmly dispersed the crowd, assuming the strange silent figures in the ornate suits were escaped circus performers who had taken some very bad drugs. They were escorted, bewildered and smelling faintly of curry, to the local precinct for their own safety. The Rixians weren't part of the gold rush. They hadn't even bought the idea. They were bottom-feeding scavengers who had the spectacular misfortune of getting clipped by a hecaton patrol vessel 2 systems over and had been leaking hypercoolant ever since. Their ship's nav computer, cross-referencing their desperate need for refined heavy metals with galactic survey charts, flagged the planet as having pre-warp industrial sites. It was their only hope. They aimed for the largest cluster of factories they could detect from orbit, praying they'd find something, anything they could use before their ship simply fell apart. The night shift at the Porsche R&D facility in Stuttgart, Germany, was a sacred time for Dr. Anki Schmidt. It was quiet, it was peaceful, it was a time for coffee, complex fluid dynamics simulations, and the pure, unadulterated joy of engineering. She was on a break with her team in the employee parking lot when her peace was broken. The Rixian ship, shaped like a cluster of dark, sharp-edged shards, wobbled through the air, trailing smoke, and made a very clumsy, very loud emergency landing, crushing a brand-new 911 Turbo S in the process. There was a moment of stunned silence. "His insurance is not going to cover that," murmured Klaus, one of her senior engineers. A ramp lowered, and 3 Rixians emerged, their chitinous exoskeletons seeming spun from dark glass. They looked panicked, holding tools that sparked and fizzled, their bodies showing stress fractures. They were clearly looking for parts. The half-dozen German engineers standing in the parking lot did not run. They did not scream. They did not reach for weapons. They reached for flashlights and diagnostic data pads. They surrounded the damaged ship and its bewildered crew, not with hostility, but with an intense, unnerving curiosity. "Faszinierend," Anki breathed, her eyes wide with delight. She shone her maglite on the ship's damaged landing strut. "The material composition, it appears to be carbon silicate lattice, but the energy dissipation pattern is unlike anything I have ever seen. Klaus, go get the spectrometer." "Is that a localized anti-gravity projector?" another engineer, Heidi, asked, pointing at a sputtering device on the ship's underbelly. "The power-to-lift ratio must be astronomical. How do you shield the pilot from the gravitational shear?" The Rixians, who had expected to encounter terrified locals, found themselves backed against their own ship by a firing squad of questions. "What is your primary propulsion system? Is it a contained singularity drive or some form of vacuum energy manipulation?"
The hull plating, is it grown or forged? The microfractures suggest biological self-repair, but the energy signature is all wrong. Donnerwetter! Look at this power conduit. The shielding is pathetic. It's leaking hard radiation all over the place. You're lucky you didn't all get cancer. The lead Rixian held up its three-fingered hands in a gesture of surrender. It had faced down cosmic rays and pirate fleets, but it had never faced a surprise peer review from a team of German automotive engineers. It was terrifying. "Please," it chirped in a translated tinny voice, "stop asking questions." Anki Schmidt patted its narrow shoulder. "Nonsense, my new friend. We are not going to hurt you. We are going to help you by taking your ship apart. For a full diagnostic workup, of course, for safety." She beamed. It was less a threat and more a fascinating design problem that had just landed in her lap. The Rixians, utterly defeated by the sheer force of technical interrogation, willingly surrendered. It was happening. It was finally gloriously happening. Jebediah, Jeb Stone, leader, founder, and chief armorer of the Montana Bighorn Basin Neighborhood Watch, whispered the words into his headset like a prayer. For 20 years, he and his crew had been preparing for this. The day the balloon went up. The day they came. They had never been entirely clear on who they were. The government, the UN, lizard people, but aliens were definitely on the list. And now, a charcoal gray wedge-shaped dropship was descending into his back 40. Alarms, salvaged from a decommissioned Cold War-era early warning station, blared across the valley. Lights snapped on. The neighborhood watch, a dozen strong, was mobilized. Sub-Warlord Karg's second-in-command, a hecaton named Brack, watched the scene on his view screen. Low population density, isolated, perfect. He had learned from Karg's mistake. No finesse, just overwhelming force. "Deploy troops! Level the primary structure! Secure any assets!" he rasped. The ship's main hatch hissed open. Jeb and his crew unleashed a torrent of gunfire. It came from all directions. AR-15s, hunting rifles, a few shotguns loaded with slugs, and from the barn, the deafening thump-thump-thump of a .50-caliber machine gun that Jeb had found. The small arms fire pinged harmlessly off the hecaton's personal armor and the ship's hull. It was completely ineffective, but it was terrifying. The sheer volume of it, the relentless, enthusiastic noise. The hecaton troopers, expecting cowering locals, hesitated on the ramp, pelted by a hailstorm of lead. "What is this?" Brack demanded. "A coordinated defense?" Then it got worse. The barn doors flew open and outroared Jeb's pride and joy, a heavily modified tractor with a 10-foot-wide snowplow welded to the front, its engine roaring like a dragon with indigestion. It wasn't fast, but it was big, heavy, and aimed directly at the drop ship's extended landing gear. "Ramming speed!" Jeb screamed over the comms, a wild grin on his face. The hecaton troopers fired their plasma repeaters at the charging tractor. The bolts of energy slagged the engine block and blew the tires, but Jeb had been aimed true. The sudden loss of power and traction sent the massive vehicle into an uncontrolled, mud-slicked slide. Its sheer, unguided mass did the job, pivoting sideways and slamming into the forward landing strut with the god-awful screech of protesting metal. The strut bent, then snapped. The entire dropship tilted violently, throwing the troopers on the ramp to the ground. Alarms blared inside the hecaton ship now. "Hull breach! Stabilizers failing!" the ship's AI announced. Brack stared at the smoking, weaponized farm equipment. This was madness. They had been outmaneuvered by agricultural machinery and a level of aggression that bordered on cheerful. "Retreat!" he roared. "Fall back! Get us out of here!" The hecaton scrambled back aboard their listing ship. The hatch sealed, and with a groan of stressed metal, the dropship lurched into the sky, one landing strut dangling uselessly as it fled eastward, away from the whooping and triumphant gunfire of the Bighorn Basin Neighborhood Watch. Major Lin Bai of the People's Liberation Army Special Operations Directorate,
watched the fleeting Hecaton dropship on her drone's thermal feed. She did not whoop. She did not cheer. Her face was a mask of calm focus. The American militia had been a useful, if noisy, distraction. Target is airborne, heading 090. It's damaged and losing altitude, she said into her comms. Her voice clipped and precise. Asset is ripe for acquisition. Her unit was not a dozen enthusiasts in a barn. It was a silent, blacked-out helicopter squadron and 3 ground teams of China's most elite soldiers. They didn't engage directly. They didn't need to. Commander, we have a lock. Deploy the countermeasures, she ordered. A high-altitude drone, invisible against the night sky, fired a single, non-kinetic pulse. It was a focused beam of electromagnetic energy that washed over the Hecaton dropship. On board the fleeing craft, every system simultaneously died. The lights went out, the engine sputtered and fell silent. The ship, now just a very heavy piece of rock, began to fall. Brack's last moment of command was one of profound confusion at his vessel simply stopped working. It crashed, not with a bang, but with a series of sickening crunches, into a dense forest. Before the dust had even settled, Major Lin Bai's teams were on it. They moved. They didn't knock. They used plasma cutters to breach the hull in 3 places at once. Flashbangs and suppressive gas flooded the interior. The dazed and disoriented Hecaton troopers, including Brack, were subdued and secured before they even understood what was happening. It was the first truly successful, coordinated human counter-operation of the invasion. It was silent, swift, and utterly terrifying in its competence. By dawn, the clearing in the woods was empty. The Hecaton dropship and its entire crew had vanished, hauled away on massive flatbed trucks to a hidden research facility deep in the Gobi Desert. The only evidence they had ever been there were some broken trees and the lingering metallic scent of fried circuits. Major Lin Bai watched the convoy depart, then made a single call. "Asset secured," she reported. "Begin analysis." The abandoned Cold War-era train depot in eastern Poland smelled of rust, decay, and desperation. It was Captain Selyan's prearranged, disaster-class rendezvous point, a place you only went when a simple snatch and grab had gone catastrophically, biblically wrong. Her ship, the Gilded Tern, was hidden in a cavernous train shed, its hull pockmarked from a panicked retreat through a forest after the pub brawl. Her first mate, Riz, was trying to patch a damaged power conduit with what looked suspiciously like duct tape. "It's not gonna hold, Captain," Riz grumbled. "We need a proper energy regulator, the kind you can't get on a planet where the top tech is setting fire to distilled liquids." "Work with what you got," Selyan snapped, pacing. Her train of thought was derailed by the sound of another ship landing outside. A big one. A heavily damaged Hecaton dropship, to be precise. It settled with a groan, its one remaining landing strut buckling under the strain. Selyan drew her sidearm. "Hostiles!" The Hecaton hatch opened, and Sub-Warlord Karg emerged, flanked by his 2 remaining battered troopers. He looked less like a conqueror and more like someone who had been mugged by a garden tool. He saw Selyan and her crew, and his hand went to his own weapon. "Pirate!" Karg rasped, his voice full of gravelly menace. "You are far from your usual scavenging grounds." "Warlord!" Selyan shot back, her voice dripping with scorn. "You look like you lost a fight with a rock." Before the standoff could escalate, a third, smaller and far more ornate vessel descended with a theatrical flourish, landing delicately between the 2 larger ships. The ramp lowered, and Aromathurge Veen, the collector, glided out, looking deeply traumatized. "A pox on this world," Veen declaimed, his scent suit still struggling to purge the memory of Mumbai. "A maelstrom of chaotic effluence, a cacophony of odors that would make a star squid gag." Karg and Selyan stared at the newcomer. "And who are you supposed to be?" Karg grunted. "I am an artist, a purveyor of spectacle," Veen announced, "and I have just been assaulted by a fried potato pastry and the collective goodwill of 1,000 curious locals." A tense, awkward silence fell over the depot. 3 alien factions, each on a mission to exploit the planet, now found themselves battered, broken, and hiding in the same derelict building. Cillian was the first to lower her weapon. Greed was a more powerful motivator than pride. All right, look, let's state the obvious. This planet is a death trap. The assets are not compliant. My ship's busted, your ship's a write-off. She said nothing, nodding at Karg. And you, she pointed at Veen, smell faintly of cardamom and defeat. It's the saffron that truly lingers, Veen lamented. Karg slowly lowered his own weapon. He was a warrior, but he was not an idiot. The locals are unexpectedly violent. And resourceful, Veen added. And they offer you food before they swarm you. It is most disorienting. My men were beaten by a drunk in a wool coat and a farmer, Cillian admitted, the words tasting like ash. Mine were disabled by a retiree with a shovel, Karg conceded, the admission costing him visible effort. They looked at each other. Warlord, pirate, and showman. They had absolutely nothing in common, except for one unifying, all-consuming desire. We need to get off this mud ball, Cillian said. Karg nodded. Pool resources, fix one ship, and then we leave, Veen concluded, and never ever speak of this place again. Humanity, it turned out, did not wait for permission to play with its new toys. The adaptation was terrifyingly fast, breathtakingly unsafe, and gloriously inventive. In Stuttgart, Dr. Anke Schmidt and her team stood before a classic cherry-red Mercedes-Benz 300 SL Gullwing. A savage Rixian anti-gravity unit was crudely bolted to its undercarriage, connected by a spaghetti-like tangle of wires to the car's electrical system. The power regulation is, theoretical, Klaus admitted, looking at the flickering readouts on his datapad. And the inertial dampeners are, well, we couldn't get them to talk to the chassis, so they're a none. Anke, this is madness, Heidi protested. The safety regulations. Anke Schmidt just grinned, a wild, joyful light in her eyes. She slid into the driver's seat. Was Saul's? She shrugged, which roughly translated to, what the hell? Instead of turning a key, she honked the horn, with a violent lurch and the sound of a German folk song blaring from the horn. The classic car wobbled 3 feet into the air and then shot across the factory floor like a bar of soap in a bathtub. In Montana, Jebediah Stone had nearly incinerated his barn twice, but he had succeeded. A hecaton plasma repeater, a weapon capable of punching holes in a battlecruiser, was now mounted on a swivel on the bed of his Ford F-250 pickup truck. It was powered by a daisy chain of 12 car batteries and a lawnmower engine that served as a makeshift generator. "Okay, Gabriel, give her a little juice," Jeb yelled. His nephew, a kid with more enthusiasm than sense, cranked the generator. The plasma repeater hummed, glowed, and then unleashed a bolt of pure, white-hot energy that vaporized a dilapidated scarecrow half a mile away. The recoil was so immense it tore the rear axle clean off the truck, sending the whole vehicle slumping to the ground with a pathetic crunch. Jeb stared at the carnage, then at the still-glowing weapon. "We're gonna need a bigger truck," he said, his voice filled with religious awe. And in the Gobi Desert facility, Major Lin Bai's scientists, eschewing the complexities of the Hecaton operating system, had bypassed it entirely. They had hardwired the drop ship's primary power core directly into the local energy grid. For 3 glorious hours, they powered the entire city of Jiquan, causing citywide brownouts in neighboring regions and frying every surge protector in a 50-mile radius. The lead scientist, watching the power meters spin like propellers, removed his glasses and wiped them on his lab coat. "It is," he announced to his team with quiet pride, "a beautifully engineered, barely contained critical failure." Across the globe, a new and dangerous dawn was breaking, one built on stolen parts, duct tape, and a complete and utter disregard for the user's manual. Adjudicator Primus Thester's Consensus Flotilla 100 ships of pristine white and gleaming chrome dropped out of hyperspace into Earth's orbit with silent, synchronized perfection. It was a fleet designed to pacify, to awe, to enforce order through its sheer, overwhelming presence. Thester stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Equilibrium. He was about to do something the consensus hadn't done in 10,000 years: enforce a Level 1 interdiction, a hard quarantine. His synthesized voice boomed across all galactic channels, a formal, galaxy-wide declaration. By the authority of the Galactic Consensus, this system, designated 9G Delta, is now under Level 1 interdiction. No vessel shall enter, no vessel shall leave. The anomaly contained herein is to be isolated for the preservation of galactic order. This declaration is final. His grand, universe-altering speech was interrupted by subaltern Flick.
Adjudicator?
Flick stammered, his glimmer-wing feathers puffed out in alarm.
We have contacts. Sending from the planet's surface.
Thester turned to the main view screen, and his gelatinous form went rigid within its suit. From the planet below, a dozen bizarre, improbable craft descended, wobbling their way out of the atmosphere. Leading the charge was a cherry-red automobile from the planet's mid-20th century. It zipped past the flagship, its anti-gravity drive sputtering erratically, its horn blaring a tinny, upbeat folk song. Close behind it was a large four-wheeled ground vehicle with a massive plasma cannon strapped to its back. It fired an erratic, uncontrolled bolt that narrowly missed a consensus cruiser and dissipated into the black. A third craft, a captured and crudely repainted Hecaton dropship, performed a flyby, its engines roaring with newfound unregulated power. It was followed by a half-dozen smaller, jury-rigged contraptions that looked like they'd been assembled in a junkyard. The bridge of the Equilibrium was silent. The crew of the most powerful fleet in the galaxy stared, mouths and other orifices agape, at the absurd, defiant homemade armada from the planet of madmen.
Adjudicator?
Flick whispered.
Shall we engage?
Thester watched as the anti-gravity car did a wobbly barrel roll, its driver clearly having the time of her life. He watched the plasma truck try to fire again, only for its power source to visibly explode in a shower of sparks. He thought about the screaming probe. He thought about the reports from the escaped and now captured first contact teams. Then he thought about the paperwork. The environmental impact reports for discharging weaponry in a pristine, if chaotic, biosphere. The 18,000 propulsion accord violations represented by that single red car. The illegal weapons modification forms, the salvage claim disputes, the interspecies diplomatic incident reports that would need to be filed in triplicate for the captured Hecaton, Silaxian, and Rixian crews. The sheer, soul-crushing administrative tonnage of it all. The fines alone would crash their servers for a full rotation. "No," Thester said, holding up a polished chrome manipulator. "No, we shall not engage." He turned to his helm officer. "It is not cost-effective." The consensus fleet, without firing a single shot, turned with perfect synchronized grace and warped away into the silent black of space. The final official message from Adjudicator Thester, logged in the Galactic Archives, was simple and direct. Refile Sector 9G Delta. New designation. Do not disturb. Ever. On Earth, the news of the fleet's abrupt departure was met with a confused, then triumphant global cheer. Former enemies were now reluctant partners in a new and chaotic age. In a secure hangar in Poland, a furious Hecaton engineer tried to explain to a group of Polish mechanics why you cannot, under any circumstances, replace a primary coolant pump with a modified fire hydrant. In a lab in Germany, Dr. Anke Schmidt argued with a captive Rixian pilot about the inherent superiority of a stick-shift transmission, even in a vehicle that no longer touched the ground. In a holding cell in China, a defeated sub-warlord Brack was being offered a cup of tea by Major Lin Bai, who was asking very polite, very pointed questions about hecaton metallurgical sciences. And in a garage in Florida, Dale and Cletus Beauregard looked at the smoking remains of their jet-powered monster truck, which had achieved a glorious 10-second flight before exploding. "Well," Cletus said, cracking open a beer, "back to the drawing board." "Yep," Dale agreed, already eyeing a picture of the captured hecaton dropship on the news.
"Reckon we could fit one of them plasma cannons on the new chassis?"
Humanity, armed with looted, half-understood technology and a terrifying abundance of reckless confidence, was stepping out to meet the rest of a very, very nervous galaxy. And the galaxy had no idea what was about to hit it.